I am Victoria L. Burson. This is Leadership on the Go. Leadership is not always preparedness for the unknown, but it is tapping into the unknown prepared. Hello, 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 and happy Palm Sunday. Welcome to Leadership on the Go, presented by Essentials Unleashed. Listen, it's going down like 4 flat tires tonight. We have an awesome guest whom I esteem and love, Dr. Edward Donaldson. Some know him passionately by Apostle Donalson or even Bishop Donaldson. But tonight he is Dr. Edward Donaldson, bringing us some right on time narrative. And so we're just going to go ahead and get started with our show and bring him on. Come on, Dr. Donaldson, come on live. How are you doing?
I am wonderful. How are you?
I am really good. And so thank you so much for accepting Essentials Unleashed invitation for Leadership on the Go. We are so honored that you would come and share with the people who are sitting and have been awaiting and will continue to wait, because we know it's Palm Sunday, and I'm telling you, people are excited about this show, and they have told me so. So we're going to help people lead from the edges, and what that means, and how do we reimagine leadership, right? And what does that look like, and what does it mean? So we're going to go ahead and get started. I would like for you to tell the people what you're doing, introduce yourself, and give them some nuggets as to the work that you're doing, because we will start some of this from a particular work you're doing, but let them know everything that you're doing right now and what's going on in your world.
Oh my goodness, I'm so happy to be here with you. It really is a joy to talk about leading from the edges, right? And so my work is centered in resistance, resisting imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist, cis heteropatriarchy, or the centers of power and privilege in Western society. So my work really is all about leading from the margins, those who are not positioned in power and privilege in our cultural landscape at the time. I'm the director of the Doctor of Ministry program at Seattle University, where I'm an assistant clinical professor, and I have a new book out, The Black Lives Matter Movement Toward an Intersectional Theology. I serve as the dean of the College of Affirming Bishops, the president of United Ecumenical College of Bishops, the presiding prelate of Freedom Assemblies Worldwide, and the senior pastor of Kingdom Family Worship Center International.
You're doing a lot, but you're doing some great work. You know, it's okay to be a lot when it's great work and passionate work, and that it is for you. So thank you so much. And I appreciate all that you do. And I was once upon a time one of your students in that doctoral program. And I tell you, I've learned so just in a short period. I had to defer it, but just in that short period, I've learned and gleaned so much from you. And I am so thankful for your scholarship, as well as your passionate heart for the people. And so, and a lot of times those don't mix with some people, but they go hand in hand, right? If you're going to do this work, you got to have a passion for the people.
Well, one of the things, Victoria, as a leader, I am not bivocational. I have one vocation that shows up in many locations. And so primarily I see myself as a shepherd, as a bishop, as a leader. That shows up as an educator. It shows up as a senior. But it's one vocation. So I'm not bifurcated. Yeah.
I love that. And I'm going to give you credit only now. And I'm letting you know further along, I'm going to steal that. So don't look from Dr. Donaldson. I love that you're not bifurcated, and that
No,
you have one vocation, but you use that vocation in many parts of the world, many on many different levels. In fact, what I hear you saying is that you level it up to wherever God needs you to go, right? And
absolutely.
so, and that's why I talk to leaders about leveling up and what that looks like, right? And it's in layers. It's in different layers for everybody, and it's different. Let's get started. You ready?
I'm ready.
I'm so ready. Listen, I'm so excited. So, Dr. Donaldson, I got some questions here that I sat aside. I really prayed about them and wanted to ask you these questions. So let's get started. Dr. Donaldson, as you mentioned, you just released a book entitled hashtag Black Lives Matter Movement towards an Intersectional Theology, right? And you state that this work is a work that recognizes research as a site of resistance, in which you mentioned, by and for those who are marginalized. So can you speak more to this and how this impacts leaders going forward? I know that's a lot, but I am going to give you the next few minutes to unpack that. First, if you can let people understand your scholarship, why you decided to do this work, and then how does this research help people move forward, and what is the intersectionality of the Black Lives Matter movement versus theology, right?
Sure.
Or is there a versus? Go ahead.
Sure. So I decided to do this work to try to give theological language to the implicit God claims in the tenets of Black Lives Matter. Over the course of the history of Black Lives Matter, of course, the tenets have been tweaked and changed. And so I jump in the river at a very particular time, just following the death of Mike Brown. So it had morphed from the Trayvon Martin moment to the Mike Brown moment, where it really entered the mainstream popular usage for that hashtag. And they published some tenets. And as I looked from a scholarly lens, those tenets said some things about concepts of the divine that weren't explicitly being said. And I thought as a bishop, it was my job to give some God language to the movement, because every major sociological movement that has been sustainable has had some God claim attached to it, because that's how people make meaning. Right? Whether it is a movement that says there is no God or a specific thing about God, there is a meaning-making mechanism about the divine that is attached to a successful longevity of a movement. So I wanted to put the movement in conversation with some God language. And those tenets of the Black Lives Matter movement included all Black lives, included Black trans lives, included, right? And so there's a way in which, first and foremost, Blackness is marginalized. And the movement goes on to further talk about Blackness in its female forms, Blackness in its trans forms, right? And so where Blackness and gender and sexuality, where they all meet and intersect. We borrowed that term intersectionality from a sister who coined that term in the legal field, right? Kimberly Crenshaw said there are multiple burdens that people carry, and the multiple burdens of marginalization make the impact of the isms very different for those people. A cisgendered Black male is marginalized, but he does not have the same experience as a transgendered lesbian Black female.
Right. Are you finished?
Sure.
I just want to make sure. Oh,
yeah.
That was fabulous, and I'm just taking some copious notes while I'm having a conversation with you. But you said something that sparked a different kind of question that's not on my list of questions for you, and it's something I learned from you, and I took it away from you, and I'm taking it away from you. We're going to do some work around it. But you made at least me think as a student in the program with you, when you talked about one time that we have to stop allowing others or otherness to dismember us, even if that's the Black church.
That's right.
And so, and you put a question out there: why do you continue to allow people to dismember you? And I have been using that in my leadership talks and training classes, because that fits so many models.
Yes.
When we talk about reimagining leadership, And so
Yes.
can you talk a little bit more about how your work is important to to the Black church, to the church at large, and why this movement is so important, or your work around the movement Black Lives Matter, to this theological conversation that you're trying to have on page with others? Can you speak to that dismemberment, and how that fits this context right now?
Yeah, there's a way in which the traditional Black church and the traditional church more broadly has disallowed folks to live into their full authenticity and the full range of who they are. I mean,
Right.
simple things like songs that say, we want to be washed white as snow.
Right.
Right? Like, that's a way of dismembering me. I either have to be Christian in this moment or I have to choose my Blackness. But the reality is, when I remember who I am, and that is that I am made in the image of God, in the Imago Dei, I take my Blackness and my Christianity, or my Blackness and my Islamic faith, or my Blackness and my whatever it is, and I put them together in my whole self. So I don't say that I want to be washed white as snow. What I say is that I want to be washed clean and pure, right? And that does not necessarily have to have a color.
Right.
But the truth of the matter is, the whole of me comes together in one. And my work is designed to give people the tools to bring their full selves into the conversation, both as scholars, but also as practitioners, to bring whoever you are in the full range of who you are, and to find yourself in the divine. Because if we're all made in the image of the divine, there must be something of the divine for us to reflect.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm so glad that you said that. And so how do we get people to reimagine leadership differently and bring their whole self without dismembering themselves to leadership? And how do we do that while we're leading from the edges of society? And how do we get other leaders to buy in to this whole notion? I know you said a mouthful, but I'm saying here, and you might even be repetitive or redundant. I just doing this on purpose because it's very important for our further conversation as we really try to talk about Blackness, Black church, or church period. And so how do we keep remembering that we are members of God's society and God's world, and that we don't have to dismember ourselves in order to fit in? And so how do we get leaders who lead from the margins to really buy into that? Because there's a struggle there. There's a hard struggle to be who I fully am, because they don't get a lot of the scholarship. They don't get a lot of the work that the academia is doing versus the church is doing. What do we take to the streets so that people can buy in to this theological framework that you're setting up for the world?
Well, first of all, I think it starts in recognizing and understanding that most of our thinking about leadership has
Yes.
been shaped by imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist,
Yes.
federal patriarchy, right? So, and thank you, Bell Hooks, for starting us on the trajectory of that conversation. Once we recognize that the infrastructure that we have, the blueprint that we have for what it means to be leaders, is racist at its core, and it serves power and privilege, then we begin to decolonize our own minds and work on our own anti-Blackness, our own internalized anti-Blackness, and begin to dismantle that so that we can bring our full authenticity to the table. And I think it's important that we have that conversation, that theories and praxis don't arise out of nothing, but they come out of institutions and systems designed to create a sense of common sense, right? But common sense comes from the rhetoric of the church, the rhetoric of the academy, the rhetoric of the barber shop, the rhetoric of the beauty salon, right? And once the barbershop, the academy, the beauty salon, and the church, and Jack and Jill, and whatever other organizations, the Divine Nine, once those all start singing the same song, it becomes, for Black people, common sense, right? Well, in order to change that common sense, then we've got to reimagine what the church, the academy, the barbershop, the beauty salon, the Divine Nine, Jack and Jill, the Urban League, what are they all saying, so that as we get to what we call the street level, as we get to street level, we begin a conversation that is a decolonized conversation. But we can't have it until our institutions embrace the fact that mirroring the dominant society to craft and create the narrative of your institution is dangerous to the people that those very institutions are meant to.
Yes. I'm loving this. I hear an echo. Is it me? So that is wonderful, and I'm loving what you're saying. Now, watch out for the hair salons and barbershops. I used to do that for 30 years, but You're so right. You're so right. I was a minister in the gospel, back then, and people hang on to that everlasting, particularly if you're involved in the church, and the conversations that will happen in the salon, and people hold on to that, and the people in the seats are, teaching each other from their common sense or level of expertise. And so you're right about that. So next question is and I know you mentioned this in your introduction, but I want to kind of reframe it just a little bit. How does your scholarship interrogate, if any, the theological claims to the bifurcation of theology and the academy?
That's a great question. So the research that I did was research that put in conversation scholars and pastors. So I did surveys of scholars and theologians, and I did a focus group of pastors and put the findings from the focus group and the focus group and the theologians in conversation with each other in order to come up with the findings that you'll see in the book. And then the conclusion of the book is where I lay out a brand new emergent theology called Intersectional Theology. Because what I discovered was the theologians were thinking one way, but the pastors were thinking a totally different way. And the problem with that is the people in the pew were not being impacted by the theologians in the way they were by the pastors. And Black Lives Matter, the movement, is asking us to do something that the pastors, at least the pastors that I was in focus group with, were unwilling to do. It was a move they weren't willing to make. But if we're really talking about reimagining leadership, the leadership is coming from amongst the people now. It's not coming from the title. It's not coming from the position. It's coming from the movement of the feet. And those that are moving their feet are actually leading us. And so what I suggest in the book is that Black Lives Matter as a movement is leading us into a theology that pastors have almost completely missed.
So, and we had some exchange about this a little bit, because I believe, and it's just me, that, you can give me some pushback if you want, but I believe that all pastors have not missed it. And I believe some of us, yourself, those of us who are really, truly progressive, have not missed it. I wonder if we missed it, or we're trying to ignore it just to stay part of the status quo.
I think you're spot on with that. I don't think all pastors have missed it. I intentionally went with a group of pastors that I knew had progressive congregations, but were not themselves progressive.
That's good. That's good. And so what was that exchange like? And so, because you're helping some church leaders, not just pastors, we're talking about anybody who's in leadership. When you have friends around you, family around you, who is moving? Because the people are in the streets and they are moving. But where are we as faith leaders? Why are we either stuck? Why are we ignoring? Or why are we just being blindsided, or allowing ourselves to be blindsided with this whole way of leading forward from the bottom up, not the top down, right?
Whoa, that's a powerful question. And what my experience has been, not just in the research around this book, but as a director of a DMin program, you really deal with leaders. Like everyone that comes through as a student is leader. And what I have found over the course of my tenure as director and researcher and as a bishop in the Lord's church is many leaders are not listening. They become siloed in echo chambers. And this is particularly unique in Black space. There's something about leaders in Black space that surround themselves with sycophants and yes men and yes women who only regurgitate and repeat what it is that the leader is putting out in their presence. And they're not proximate enough to the people to really hear and to see and to know what it is that the people are doing, thinking, feeling. And so they're going off of old information, old systems, old paradigms, because they don't have people close enough to them to help them see that there is a shift or a move.
That's good. That's good. And to help them see that there's a shift in the move. So how do we get leaders who are leading from the margins to see, right? To see, not just with a holy eye, but just to see what the people see in the streets, what the people need in their churches, what they need as leaders in order to lead forward. And when I say lead forward, I am talking about from the margins forward, right? Or onward, or, onward or forward.
If we get proximate enough to the folks that we lead, and if we reorient ourselves as leaders of from leaders of above to leaders with, right? Like I am leader amongst leaders, that everyone in the room is a leader. It means that sometimes I have to come out of the pulpit and go to the city council meeting. Sometimes I have to miss Bible study because I'm at a police community organizing meeting. Sometimes, right? Like there's some decisions that I have to make about being among and with instead of above and over. That's
Absolutely
so helpful. Leaders that go to eat with the folks that they are attempting to lead, and go sit down and eat and listen. Don't go to sit down and eat to pontificate, but go sit down and eat and listen. And the things that you find out over shared meal, this idea of real, authentic communion from a Christian ideological framework. What does it mean to have common union with the people that you are among and with? And I think that is a huge paradigm shift, because we have been so vested in kingdom building, replicating whiteness and its power structures, that we have forgotten what is germane and organic to us as a people, and that is community.
It is very much community. And I believe not only that we've forgotten, but we tend to want to ignore ancestral upbringings and pinnings of how we model what it means to be in community. And for some reason, not all of us, I don't want to put all of us, lump all of us as faith leaders, but some of us have taken on this, I'm just trying to get in so I can fit in. And we've missed what is being said in the streets. We miss the prophetic utterance. We miss what the people are needing, and we ignore it because we're so busy trying to. I think I post something where I got it from Stacey Abrams' book, Leading from the Outside, and she talked about this quest for power is always rigged. Right. And it is rigged. And so when we are looking for that kind of power and it's not authentic, it's not germane, then we end up doing a disservice and dismemberment to the people we serve.
Yeah, and can I just be honest with you? I think we have bought into the false dichotomy between sacred and secular. And many times we get siloed in this idea of this is what is sacred versus these other things that are secular. But if we're going to follow maybe the leadership model of Jesus, I don't know, let's lift up Jesus as a leadership model. And then the Bible says that when he gave his greatest dissertation on the mores of his kingdom, went to a certain mount. Now, that's interesting because he was in a place surrounded by holy mounts, but he doesn't go to the holy mount to speak. He goes to a common place, right? And he sanctifies the place because there is no line between sacred and secular, right? Our
Right.
job is to sanctify the whole. And so when we think in terms of being with and among, if we show up as leaders in the places traditionally thought of as secular, we'll hear and learn models of leadership that aren't happening in our local congregations, but are happening in community organizing, grassroots organizing, hashtag Black Lives Matter, the movement for Black Lives, Me Too movement, et cetera, et cetera. These things are not secular. They are indeed sacred, and they're sacred because I'm holy and I'm there. And that's what
Right,
makes
right, right, right. And holy ground is everywhere,
everywhere.
right? We want
Everywhere
to
I
place
go.
the church as holy ground. We don't want to cuss in the church, but we don't mind cussing right outside the door
Isn't
of
that
the church,
something?
right? And and I am so glad for some of my mentors and people I esteem have freed me up, as, if I go to a bar, it's still holy, right? That space is still holy. And there are conversations that have been had at the bar. I'm literally at the bar where great conversation have happened between me and another person, and it was holy conversation, right? And so we have to stop seeing secular and stop demonizing those who are doing the work in the street and in the secular, because it's still sacred. So thanks for lifting that up. And before we start getting to the well, no, let's just go there, since you mentioned brought up Jesus. I was trying to save it towards the end, but you want to bring it up. So I was I'm part of a cohort for Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference. And in that cohort, I was part of a Mobile Institute series given by Vanderbilt, and a work around Dr. Teresa Smallwood, who's a fellow there. And Dr. Alan Bosak, I think I'm enunciating that correctly, stated in that, and I just want to see, how does your work fit into this? As a lecturer, he stated that if you say Jesus, you have to say justice, right? But my question is, what about those who don't say Jesus? Can you still say justice, right? And I know his work was reflecting something a little deeper than what I'm making of it, but it just stuck out to me that a lot of people think justice is always, justice is always connected to Christianity, right? Or the Jesus movement, but it's not. And so can you help us as faith leaders or non-faith leaders, because there are going to be people watching this who may not be necessarily Christian or part of a church. How do we move them along in the work that you're doing and leading from the edges and reimagining leadership?
So this is very interesting because I agree that if you say Jesus, indeed you are saying justice, right?
Absolutely.
Because this historical figure of Jesus is born a Palestinian Jew under Roman occupation, right? And who is born into poverty and rails against power and privilege. That's a historical narrative. Much like the historical narrative of a lawyer by the name of Gandhi, who chooses to walk away from legal practice and chooses to take nonviolent social resistance as a way to push back against empire.
Yes.
Right? So these stories and narratives of justice reappear and reappear with folks that are on the side of those that are on the margins. Whether you are a Jesus person or a Gandhi person or a King person or a Malcolm X person, justice keeps reappearing. What I am afraid of is I'm afraid that in our attempt to reach beyond the Jesus people, we're dismissive of the Jesus story. And what I believe is that Jesus story is helpful even if you're not a Jesus person. In the same way that the story of Gandhi is helpful, even if you're not a nonviolent person. In the same way that the story of King is helpful, right? So I lift up Jesus along with every other historical figure who does the work of justice, and I'm unapologetic about lifting up Jesus in that way, because in the conversation of justice, we're not talking about how you feel about the divine. We're not talking about Jesus as Savior of the world. That's not even a theological conversation. It's a historical reality, and there's a narrative that is redemptive for us in the same way as Alice Walker's book, The Color Purple, becomes for me a story of redemption. The movie does a horrible job of showing redemption, but in comparison with Alice Walker's masterful narrative, where every man who was in need of redemption at the beginning of the story is redeemed in some way, shape, or form by the end of the story. In that same way, I lift Jesus up as an example of what happens when people on the margins begin to move toward what is right, good, and just.
I love that response. I love that response. Thank you so much. That is wonderful. So what you just stated, so how do we take the historical Jesus story and make it relevant today for the faith movement and the non-faith movement, and in its modification of justification? So let me ask this question. What are some of the ways in which that story or theology of justification can work towards leading from the edges today? And how has justification, and I want to put it this way, the politics of justification, how has that canceled out justice? I know that's a lot. I'm asking you a lot, but I know your brain can handle it.
Yeah, so let me start with today being Palm Sunday, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
And there's this interesting thing that Jesus does. I'm just talking historically. The Jewish people celebrated a feast called Passover. And
Right.
the Passover narrative is that they had once been enslaved by the Egyptians. Mm-hmm. And there was a time where Moses was raised up as a leader and deliverance comes to the people. And they're celebrating this when Jesus is born, but they find themselves under Roman occupation. They find themselves on the margins yet again. And so they are looking back at their own history in a kind of Sankofa moment where they're looking back to look forward. And at this time, the Roman emperor, Victoria, decides to get his best horses, his best military men, and do a parade through town. He does it every year while they're celebrating Passover. And he does it in order to tell the people, you're not going to be delivered or freed this time. Jesus performs the first political satire. Jesus goes and gets a young colt and drapes himself and sits on the colt. And on the opposite end of the town, at the same time that the emperor is parading through, reminding the people that they are occupied, that they are marginalized, that they are disenfranchised and disinherited, Jesus comes through on this little teeny donkey and says, you know what? I know how to upend power. I know how to claim personhood. What he really is doing in this moment is remembering his people. And all the people come out and they get in the streets and they say, we got you. We remember David. We remember Moses. We've been in this situation before. Now, your question was, how does this story of justification hit the street now? Well, whether you believe Jesus is God or not, you have to dig this political satire that Jesus just pulls. You have to dig this riot that they're having in the street. You have to dig that they are insurrectionists, right? And if we give this generation the story of political satire called the triumphant entry,
yes,
I don't necessarily need you to speak in tongues to be empowered by the Jesus narrative to do the work of justice, because the narrative speaks for itself with or without your belief.
Yes, that's good. That's good. That's good. Thank you so much for speaking on that. I see right here where Sue has come on, political satire. So that was really good. I like the way you frame that, because people need to hear, I get so tired of the traditional church trying to take the political Jesus out of the story. Right. And people need to see and hear more about the politicalness of what we call the Word of God, right? And they need to hear how that is framed and how we're utilizing it. Progressive theology is utilizing that today. So how do we galvanize the people to join the struggle rather than Christianize the struggle, though? I love the Jesus, but how do we galvanize the people to join the struggle and not make it the Christian struggle only?
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. I don't think we have to galvanize the people. I think we need to join the people's struggle. The people are already in the struggle, right? There's there's not this sense that we own the struggle. That's what it means to do leadership reimagined, right?
Right.
Imagine that what we need to do is, and this is what my book was really trying to do. It was trying to resource the movement that was already happening. I did not come up with hashtag Black Lives Matter, but I did come alongside of hashtag Black Lives Matter to say, here's another resource that gives you another way to talk to this group of people. That's what we have to do. We have to de-center our own selves and begin to center the folks that are already doing the work. They are galvanized. We join in with them. We become laborers together, right? Like there's another way where and I hate to Christianize, but as Christians, we believe that Christ is with us, right? So we then become Christ with those that may or may not have Christ, but they do have movement. So
absolutely.
That to them. I don't think it's incumbent upon us to galvanize. I think it's incumbent upon us to come alongside and partner and join with and join in.
Right. And so I'm glad you said that. I just wanted to push you and hear what you said, because we think alike on that. We don't have to galvanize, but there for a long time, there are still leaders who believe the church needs to be in front, in front of the struggle and get the people behind it. And I don't believe that anymore. I don't think that's happening. And I think even because of COVID, is really showing us that more and more and more, so that it's already there, that we just need to join and partner and collaborate with the struggle in the areas that we are being lifted up as church leaders or faith leaders, if you will. You agree or?
No, I totally agree. And I think this idea that the church has to be in front is preposterous because it's too late. Right? Like, how do you get in front of a bus that left the station without you? Catch up, get on the bus, and go going, because it's far too late for us to decide that there's a movement, because we're just, in many cases, we're just figuring out that the folks we lifted up as leaders hate us. We're just figuring that out. Right. I'm going to call names, and maybe you don't do that on this show, but
you just be careful. Go ahead.
Okay. Paula White showed her hand.
Oh, no, you can call that name.
Okay. Right now, but who made Paula White relevant? Let's be honest. It was the Black church that made her relevant. And now we're mad because she's showing the truth of what she always was and who she always was when we decided to give her power. Because white folks were not coming for Paula. They weren't here for her. She couldn't make a name among them. She made a name because we lifted her up. And then she showed us who she really was. But had we had any discernment, we could see that. I knew who she was. I saw her. I saw her when she pulled out the garage, right? I knew where that car was going. And so, so we're just now figuring out that the folks that we lifted up as leaders were not worthy of our trust. We can't be out in front of something when the world is looking at us saying, wake up and catch up. What we have to do now is come alongside and respond to and respond with, because we are relevant and we do have something to say. We are just not in the position that we were in times past.
Exactly my point. And so people who are not in a position, and some are in that position right now. Sure. But people who are not in that position, we leaned and gleamed. If I'm going to be very, very transparent and honest, I was one of those people. I'm very Angela Davis, Black Power, person. But at the time, Martha Manuzzi, Paula White, we can go down the gamut because of the kind of churches I was in. I was in mega churches most of my life. And when those people are filling in the pulpits, then you get caught up connecting with those spirits that come to those. And I'm not saying that anything's wrong with it, but some of them did show their hand some years ago, right? But how do we get people to reimagine how we need to see the future leadership in the church and how we need to lead in the church? Not future leadership in the church, but how do we need to reimagine how we lead from the margins? Let me reframe that. I'm trying to get, because there are people that are going to see this show. And I understand we've talked about the faith movement. We talked about Christianity. I am unapologetically Christian and Black. and same gender loving. But you know what? I want to talk more about in the last few minutes of our time. How do we get from here to there? Because we have a lot of highly intelligent people who are connected now, who are doing the work in the streets. We have people, faith leaders doing the work in the secular. How do we position ourselves? How do we position ourselves to move forward in this work without always having to look for a title, a status, or a name, right? Because I think some of us struggle with still wanting to be important or see me, see what I'm doing, rather than doing the work when God has called us to do a particular work, right? And, you know, it's an old song my dad used to always sing when I was growing up, and a charge I have to keep and a God to glorify. And I still believe in that song because, you know, a charge we do have to keep. And you don't have to have a title to keep the charge.
Yeah. So that's an interesting question. I think the same way that we are reimagining leadership in our other institutions is the same way we have to reimagine leadership across the board. And the lens I like to use to do that is JEDI, Justice, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. I know what had been popularized was diversity, equity, and inclusion. Oh, everybody's got a DEI department now. I'm telling you, the KKK has a DEI department. But when you add justice on to that, then it changes the framework through which you work, through which you think, through which you chronicle. So as a male embodied person, cisgendered male embodied person, I query myself often in a room with my female embodied siblings as to whether or not I have talked too much. Even if I am the expert in the room, there is a way in which I have to hold space for my siblings because of my male privilege, right?
Right.
And I don't have any guilt over male privilege. I don't have any guilt over maleness. I love my maleness. There's nothing toxic about my masculinity. God bless it. I love it. And I have a responsibility to it because it has been assigned privilege, right? So then I have to manage that privilege responsibly, guilt-free, right?
Manage the privilege, guilt-free.
Guilt-free.
That is a whole lot that you say right there. That's a show by itself. Yeah. Managing your privilege, because there's all forms of privileges. It's not found in your maleness. It could be found in my woman. It could be found in my education.
That's right.
I was forced when I was in seminary to look at the color of my skin because I was a lighter person of color. And I had to look at it. And when we were dealing with the faces at the bottom of the well and color blindness, and, you know, we just had to really delve in and as a womanist, I had to really look at it. And those voices, my ancestral voices that challenge us to look, because I was very ignorant to school days. Very ignorant.
My goodness.
I did not know that what that movie was about when it initially came out. I had no clue it was about. I was ignorant. I was in my salon as an image consultant one day, and I came in, and my clients, see, there you go, educated me. The people in the street educated me because I had no clue. I just saw a movie with a lot of my favorite actors, and I was very clueless to what was going on and what was happening in the institution of the people and the institution itself. So that was a whole lot that you said, a mouthful, and I'm going to think about that. That might have to be a show that you have come and talk about because that is awesome. So let's talk about vulnerability and adaptability.
Yes.
I saved it for last because I wanted to be the last conversation because I know this would take up most of our conversation. Let's talk about how do vulnerability and adaptability play a role in how we function as leaders who lead from the edges or from the margins, and how must that play a role? I believe it has to play a role.
I do too, and I'm such a church boy. Pray for me, right? But this new wave of leadership that focuses on vulnerability is what the old folks said was humility.
Humility.
It's humility, right? We are calling it vulnerability. We've repackaged it because vulnerability is real sexy and humility is not. But let me tell you, in order to be vulnerable, you also have to be humble. The root of vulnerability is your own personal humility, right? You have to step back and say, can I tell you the truth? I don't trust you to tell me what your strengths are if you can't tell me what your weaknesses are. I also don't trust you to tell me where you're weak unless you can tell me where you're strong. Because what do you have to measure it against? Now, that's where vulnerability comes in. Vulnerability is to say, hey, Victoria, this is what I do really, really well. Let me do that. I don't do this too well. Let's manage that, right? Let's manage what I don't do well, and let's maximize what I do well. I am a teacher at heart and a preacher by gift, right? And there's this tradition in the Black church where you go to other pastors' churches for their anniversary. They give you 5 minutes to greet the people. And what they really want is to bring an offering. You know what I'm saying? But they say, oh, we have to hear from you. We have to hear from you. Just give us 5 minutes. Give us 5 minutes. And what I had to do, to be honest with you, in order to manage my gift well, is I had to start refusing the 5. Because what I have to say, and particularly in that season in my life, what I have to say is going to take me longer than 5 minutes to say. And what I have to say is so valuable that I'd rather not say anything than try to truncate what I really do have to say. I will come. I will bring you a check because that's what you really want. I'll stay and listen to everybody, but I'll not talk. Thank you so much. There's no need for my voice because what my voice is going to do doesn't fit in the container you have for it. That's vulnerability. That is to say, first of all, my ego doesn't need a microphone. And second of all, when I have a microphone, I know what I'm capable of doing with it.
All right, now.
It's for both of us if I don't have the microphone. That's the vulnerable space. Now, it means you may get looked at a certain way by other people, right? There's a cost to vulnerability. But real leadership is emboldened by the humility that it takes to really be vulnerable.
And I love, you are so correct. And a couple of things. I was so glad because I was like, what is he going to say? What is he going to say? Because I do this big teaching on, and have in the past, on that for every strength, there's a corresponding weakness.
Yeah. For
every strength, there's always a corresponding weakness. We can't have all these strengths and don't have any weaknesses.
That's right.
But I come from an era, and I might date myself, where, it was particularly in the 90s, where people wanted you to focus on your weakness. Just focus on your weakness. And people have gotten messed up because all they could do, or all they've been told by psychologists and management, or, various academic settings, that you have to focus on your weakness. And it killed the people. It really harmed us more than it helped us, right? And so I'm glad that you said that there has to be this harmony. This kind of has to be this sense of balance between the two, because we know for every strength, you could be strong here, but there is a corresponding weakness. And one of my mentors taught me that about 25 years ago. And I've lived into that truth and I've seen it. But you have to be willing, like you said, you have to be humble enough to say, I'm weak in this area and I need help. And that's where I believe people who lead from the margins, or who are trying to reimagine leadership, need to really, really hear this piece, because you have to be vulnerable enough to even say, I need help, or I have a weakness and I need help in that weakness, if you don't know how to manage it. You get what I'm saying? And a lot of times we don't want to show that part of us, that we have a weakness. And we do. We all do. It just comes with this whole thing called life. And so how does, with this vulnerability, I like how you framed that, how does adaptability play its role?
Yeah, I think that's where the managing of one's weakness really comes in. And then not just the managing of one's weakness, but managing both your strength and the shadow of your strength, right? Because you are so strong in some areas, there is fallout and byproduct of your strength. There's ways in which, as a leader, I have certain strengths that, because I have those strengths, they are intimidating to other leaders. Right? I am aware of that intimidation. It makes me uncomfortable because it is not my intent. My intent is never to intimidate, but I've been given the feedback enough that now I believe that I guess intimidation is there. Now, what does that mean? It means I have to adapt even my strength to make room for other leaders for whom that is not their strength. I also then have to say, here are my weaknesses, right? I am a visionary. I am not always the details guy. If I'm forced to be the details guy, you will not get the vision. You're not going to get a visionary who is a details guy, not with me. So when I am in the visionary role, I have to staff myself with purely detailed people.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Because if I don't, we'll just vision, and nothing will come to pass, right? I have to also then, when one of those folks is unable to meet that role, I have to step into the place that is not my strength. And from my weakness, I've got to work in that area until such a time as they can be replaced. Right? I don't get to have the excuse, well, that's not my thing. So no, I'm going to work it while I am working to replace so that I can get out of that role as quickly as possible. That's the type of adaptability that we need, a reflexive resolve to success in order for us to really be leaders in this time.
Yes, that is wonderful. And I don't know what else to ask you right now. I mean, well, I do, but because of the limited time, I don't want to get into something. But this whole piece around vulnerability and adaptability in the church is going to be very much needed in this next leg of what we call leadership or reimagining leadership, because a lot of us who are strong leaders and who are heavily gifted, and I'm glad you mentioned that up without pause, because sometimes people think you're arrogant when you are mentioning that. Now, and I think you and I are very much alike in that area. I'm very much a visionary, but I also have some other strengths, but I have some weaknesses, and I know how to pull back. I may be, people think because they're managers for a corporation that they can come and pastor a church. No, it's a different kind of, because you don't manage people.
That's right.
Right? You manage systems. So if you was always managing systems, you'll have a hard time when it's time to lead people, because you're used to managing systems, right? And you would try to, combine the two. No, you cannot do that. And so you have to know your strengths and you have to know your weaknesses. And I like how you parallel the two. And I also like how you lifted up that when you walk in a room, or when you're involved or engaged in something, you have a presence or essence that people are intimidated about. And it has nothing to do with you. No. But I used to allow that to bother me, and I will respond or dummy down. And I think a lot of leaders have dummied down themselves in order to fit in so that people would not be uncomfortable. And I would say it's time out for that. You got to be all that God has called you to be, or something will happen with, like what Bishop Flunder says or used to say to me, or God would turn the page, right? And so we don't want God turning the page on us if God called us to a particular work. But if we're going to always worry about, or, how others view us or see us, because God has given us a particular strength, then we will be damaged goods. And so I'm so glad that you spoke to this. Can you give us 2 or 3 minute, a 2-minute nugget before we leave on just summing this whole thing up and the work that you do in our conversation, or anything extra that you would like to say to leading from the edges or reimagine this whole notion of leadership while leading from the edges?
Yeah, I really would like to end talking about managing your own strength, because there's a difference between dumbing down and then being insensitive, right? Right. And so I spent a lot of my life hearing, you're too much. It don't take all of that. You got your church overeducated, but right? I heard a lot of that. And so I did practice dumbing down. Where I have grown to is I am self-aware so that I can be self-regulating.
Yes.
That in the room, when you are intimidated, then I can invite you into your greatness. I never step out of mine. I only invite you into yours. I used to step out of my own greatness and displace myself so that you could feel special. But the truth is that really is condescending, because I've taken the power of choice away from you. My job is not not defrock myself from my greatness and play small. My job is to invite you into your greatness and into your genius, and to manage that presence in such a way that you feel empowered and inspired to be your full best highest self. I think that's the adaptability of leadership that we're going to need going forward, is we need mutual invitation to greatness and to success. And I think if we can focus on empowering people by being graciously aware of our own presence, to be fully invested and involved in their own success, then we're going to see all of our organizations grow by leaps and bounds.
We're going, oh boy, you just made me shout at the end. You just made me shout. If we could just see that. And so leaders, listen, our time is up with Dr. Apostle Bishop Edward Donaldson, who has, oh my God, has so graciously come on Leadership on the Go and have filled us with such information and knowledge and understanding and wisdom, particularly, and knowledge and understanding supernaturally, because I believe you are truly a man from God. I really almost believe you're Jesus, like first cousin.
You pray my strength in the Lord.
But anyway, listen, we're going to have you back to talk more about this whole adaptability at another segment, another time. But this has been great. It's been wonderful. I appreciate your work. I can't wait to get that work. And so you have to tell the people, where can they get your book?
You can get it on Amazon.com.
Oh, really?
Yes, Amazon.com or Within Stock. Either one, Within Stock Publishers or Amazon.com. Just type in the Black Lives Matter movement. It will pop up, I promise you, toward Intersectional Theology. Or you can type my name in to Amazon.com, and I think about 9 of my books will pop up.
9 of his books. You guys hear that? He is a serious author. I'm just trying to get out my 2 or 3, but it's called procrastination, and God is dealing with me with that. So we thank you for your work. We thank you for your scholarship. We thank you for the work that you're doing in this world and will continue to do, and how it's, leveling up, and how it's growing, and how it's meeting people where they are, even from an academic perspective, right? And I appreciate that about you, and always have appreciated that about you. And so thank you, Dr. Donaldson. Cara Solutions, can you come and just let the people see you? Yes. So we want everyone to see Cara Solutions, Pastor Sue Webley, who preached today. I didn't hear the sermon. I'll go back and hear it later. But she looks so beautiful. But she is the one that's behind our production, and we say thank you to her. You want flyers, if you want. I mean, y'all, right now it's going down like 4 flat tires for her company, because she is really fully booked right now as far as a lot of production, but she is still open to, editing and doing your flyers and et cetera, et cetera. So how can they reach you, Cara?
Well, I'm making sure you can hear me, because I did put my headphones on. So if any of you are interested in any of my services, you can head over to www.cara-solutions.com. I will put this overlay up so that you can see all of that information right there. And shoot me a message, and I will get back to you within 48 hours.
All right. So yes, she's very good at what she does. So shoot her a message. And so we thank God for her work that's coming forth as well. She's also in divinity school. So yes, let's wait. Yeah, we are excited about that. And so again, we just want to thank Dr. Donaldson for being our special guest today. We're so excited for what God is doing in your world. And so thank you. Listen, in the next 2 weeks, we will have, do you have that flyer up, Cara? I know I should have probably already asked you. In the next 2 weeks, we're going to have some sister friends of mine, and we're going to be talking about girls' trip, right? Are we there yet? We're going to talk about what it means to be a strong Black woman, and we're going to talk about ways in which we can deconstruct the demonization of a strong Black woman. All right? And so we look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks. We do everything on the 2nd and 4th Sundays only. Thank you. God bless you. And again, happy Palm Sunday. Have a great Holy Week.